Kevin, welcome to Al Insights. Thanks for joining me today. Wanted to have a conversation. I know your background's in AI and you're a recidivistic entrepreneur. And wanted to just kind of delve into your background a little bit, give folks context, and then talk about the exciting stuff that you're working on now.
I like the recidivist entrepreneur. I sort of joke that I'm a risk-averse entrepreneur to some degree. And I know that sounds a little bit strange, but in business school, I founded my first company. And it didn't necessarily go anywhere, but the business plan competition came with a seed funding round, and it really introduced me to an angel network. And after the company had kind of gone through its process, I became a stable executive for these guys. So it wasn't...
Is that like an entrepreneur in residence kind of thing?
Sort of. I would say it wasn't that formal. It was a small group of independent angels that were extremely high net worth, and I became a go-to operating executive for them, for their placements. So if you needed a COO type with an unhealthy tolerance for risk, that was me. So I did placements in all kinds of different industries, in piezoelectrics, in online to offline services. That was a tire business that installed tires in people's driveways. I helped build an online kids interactive realm. And I built the world's first hot dog vending machine, of all things. I bet you didn't know that.
A lot can go wrong with that.
A lot can go wrong with that. But along the way, I saw a lot of things going sideways with how investments were placed. And I saw a great deal of money being poured on ideas that really hadn't been tested yet. They hadn't been proof tested in terms of MVP. And Eric Ries and his lean startup were really doing the rounds. This is 15 years ago or so. And I realized that with the rise of social media, there was an opportunity for me to do low-risk entrepreneurship, that I could have a concept, toss up the concept in front of a hypothetical audience and see if anybody cared. And if they cared, then I would proceed to step two. And the way that this played out was in the acquisition of patents, or licensing of patents, depended on the case. So I found that basically everyone in my network had somebody in their life who had some stack of utility patents they didn't know what to do with. So I had tons of lead flow, but I would essentially look at a patent, decide if I was at all interested, and then I would put up what we call a landing page on the internet, and then I would drive traffic through a social site like Facebook and see if anybody cared. If they clicked on that all-important add to cart button, I would know that I had something. And then I would proceed to step B and start with license negotiations or purchase negotiations. And that turned into a business that had several different patent verticals in sexy topics like automotive detail and kitchen appliances and things like that. But I built a series of digitally native brands that were levering whatever that core IP was to create a universe of products around them. And along the way, digital marketing became incredibly complex in terms of data density, data analysis, and the lift that was required to execute on these brands. It wasn't just toss up a landing page, drive some traffic to it anymore. It was very sophisticated analysis of customer behavior. And that bridged into work in machine learning and being able to analyze data signals that were coming from all of the sources that I had from different directions. So I ended up as a seed investor in one of the leading attribution software platforms after having started to developing one myself, realizing that somebody else was going to do it better. So placing those chips on the table in that way seemed to make a lot of sense to me. So I exited MadBrainsAI back in 2019 and had been playing with some of these machine learning sort of concepts, which brings us up to this current era. So I had just left private equity engagement running as a brand for somebody else. As an entrepreneur, I think one thing I've learned is that I'm not necessarily the world's best employee. So it wasn't terrible or anything, but it was a London-based engagement, and I was in Utah, and it was sort of a mess. Like during COVID, couldn't get any place. So I'd left. And I was more aware than most people what was happening in generative AI. But like most people, I was pretty surprised with what happened when OpenAI just dropped GPT on the world without an instruction manual. And I had my sort of plastics moment when I saw what was happening with it, and I went all in. I spent the last 2 years working in that space, doing literacy development with organizational leadership, with boards, with investors, C-suite, bringing them up to speed with what's possible in these tools, and then working with them on road mapping and developing solutions.
Using a lean startup mentality, because you started off with, back when the internet was a little bit simpler, the ability to do, rapid prototyping, if you will, to see if there's traction before it got complex with SEO and digital data mining and the things that made that less accessible. How does that transfer to your the way you look at the rapid prototyping for AI, chatbots, agents? Does that translate?
Oh, 100%. And it is less on the product market fit side than it is on the product side, unfortunately. But on the product side, I literally just came from an ideation session where I was helping an entrepreneur take a concept that he had and develop a MVP sort of approach using Claude, which is Anthropic's frontier model, and its new JavaScript-enabled features, which are called artifacts, to play with the sort of prompting structure that he would need, plus the visual outputs that he would desire, before he proceeds to scoping with a dev and starting to spend real money on it. So he can get to a point where he can demonstrate that the product is reaching the sort of point that he wants. He can sort of stress test that design within the LLM itself right off the bat. And I stress to him, don't take weeks doing this. And this was sort of my own deal with I used to call it the mini MVP because it wasn't really, the V wasn't really there. It was just sort of hypothetical. Same deal here, that you want to move really fast. Like, can you stress test whatever you're working on such that you can get to sort of a yay nay of proceeding to the next step really rapidly. And seeing the visual elements and the visual outputs that you can do in some of these models right now is enormously powerful. And then even being able to equip a layperson with some of the technical tools such that they can adequately scope what they're talking about and not to be raked over the coals by some dev firm. Nothing against devs, I love devs, but if you don't know what you're talking about, it's pretty easy to end up in a bad situation with a development shop.
Yeah, I was blown away. You were generous enough to share a prompt with me to put in Claude, and with the artifacts functionality, the ability to not only write the code, but to run the code in the window allowed me to take something that I, probably took an hour or two for you to draft, something that was repeatably useful, to use some of my original content, and then to get a working web app was pretty mind-blowing, because before, if you used a Copilot or something and it came out with Python, you then had to have a VM, and you had to do some other things in order to play with the thing that you created. And this was really eye-opening for me because it just completely closed the loop. I could go from basically talking to an AI to having a workable app. How did you get there? Because it didn't seem... Once I read the prompt and I had the extra, and I did the experiment, and it was very fulfilling, how did you realize that this power was just at your fingertips?
Well, I'm paying attention for one. I spend an inordinate amount of time tracking the industry, tracking developments, playing with tools, experimenting, failing, pushing the boundaries, getting frustrated, getting angry, and being occasionally just shocked, as I was, as you said you were with Claude, that I get surprised at least once a week by something new that I didn't expect. But that open-mindedness and the willingness to experiment is what allows me to stumble on these things. I'm just going to add just a quick point of clarification, because I suspect that knowing what I know about where sort of the status of AI, a lot of people are going to have no idea what we're talking about here. That when we talk about models like GPT or Anthropic's Claude, these are the frontier models. These are the ones that are going to cost tens of billions of dollars to train. They're on like the front lines of intelligence and development. And GPT is the one that most people are familiar with via OpenAI. Claude is through Anthropic, and there's a bit of an arms race going on between those two, plus Google, plus Meta, and there's a lot of nuance in there as far as market dynamics. But they're all chasing this huge density of information, but they've approached their outputs in sort of different ways. And as you mentioned, GPT has the capability of managing Python. Python is a programming language that is required for a lot of data analysis and structuring and things like that, and it's very cool to see GPT construct Python. The user leap that Anthropic with Claude made was by outputting Java-based languages and React, such that you're already using a browser, and the browser knows how to speak these languages and interact with them, so it allows Anthropic to bridge the gap between the conceptual and the actual product output. A nuance there is at least the second, although Claude can create an applet, Claude can't incorporate Claude into the applet, which is a little bit frustrating. So you can build something that has a hypothetical functionality of analysis, which is neat, but putting an LLM layer into that tool would require you to grab that code and put it somewhere else and still build it. But you're 80% of the way there at that point. And then you can build the prompting structure within Claude or within GPT and make the whole thing work together.
So it seems like that's incredibly effective from a prototyping standpoint. And then when you want to take it to, I don't know, point 2 from point 1, you really need to still have some technical chops.
You do. I would say that there's been a lot of hype over this idea of prompt engineers in particular. And prompting is an art, for sure. It is an art that on a personal level, I don't believe is actually going to persist as a career line or even a role, because Claude in particular, or Anthropic, has its own prompting console that anyone can get access to, which allows you to construct what are called chain of thought prompts. So you have zero shot, which is this idea of just dump a bunch of information in there and let the machine come up with a solution. Chain of thought is saying, first do this, then do this. After that, reassess what you just did and then go on to the next thing. And by going through that iterative process, you're much more likely to get better outputs. Now, that right there was the art of prompt engineering. And now, since you can use some of these tools out there to build that prompt and start experimenting, the human element is a little bit more narrow. There's definitely a role for an experienced prompt engineer to check out what you're doing, but you can get a long way down the line, as you were saying, from a prototyping perspective without that. Ironically, I would say that the weakness that I find in my own products, so I've stood up now 3 different SaaS or LLM-based SaaS products, is actually in the front-end design. So where it hits the clients, like we can do all kinds of neat stuff behind the scenes and have brilliant prompts, and that's really the IP of it. But you still have to have a really good customer experience and a good customer interface, and there is an art to that. So we work with front-end designers in a very traditional way to make that happen.
You're seeing a lot of products that claim to have AI do lots of these roles. And I guess a transitional question, what's the difference between the line of thought approach in agents. Is agents just a more refined way to think of that, or do you think of it as radically different?
It's a good question. They are slightly different, but I think it's more semantics.
It's more contextual.
It's
right?
more contextual. So an agent, the idea of, to clarify, the idea of agents is to have a semi-autonomous process that's looking towards a goal, that you want the sale. Like at the end of the day, you want the sale. And selling requires prospecting, outreach, exchange, all of the normal sales processing. But if you build an agent that does all that for you, it's doing all of these things. I would say that the nuance is that at each stage of an agent process, you're going to see a lot of chain of thought processes that are under the hood. So one is sort of a subcomponent of the other. But agents are coming, and they are going to be out there in force. And yes, you are seeing a lot of these companies that are offering to do X, Y, and Z in the organization. And if I sound cynical, I am a little bit cynical, because the tech just isn't quite there for a lot of these things. And I find those business models to be a little bit frustrating to interact with, I would say.
From a 50,000-foot perspective, what I've picked up on is it seems like, if not weekly, monthly, the progress is radical. Mm-hmm. And so people that are delivering solutions have to figure out, I guess the allegory I use is a good use of an LLM in a product is as the engine. So if you want to upgrade your engine, you don't have to rebuild your car.
This was a conversation this morning, that this is super important. And if I were an investor looking at these sort of opportunities, you want to see interchangeability of tech. And good model or good applied LLM products generally have model selectability behind the scenes. And I was working with one just this morning such that I could choose my overall family of models, so OpenAI or Meta's Llama series or Anthropic, and then choose the model under the hood that I wanted to test with. And they all have their own pricing dynamics, because variable pricing in this sort of technology is sort of a new thing. Like, that's not something people are used to as a developer, that you have a variable cost of an action. So you have to find the best balance between speed, cost, and efficacy of the model. And you want to find the sort of least common denominator that allows you to yield all of those things to your desired output, right? And if you don't architect your design to incorporate that, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So people go out and they say, hey, South Asian Dev Shop, this is my idea, go and do X, Y, and Z, and they'll basically hard code it around the latest GPT model. And that model can change weekly, daily, hourly, whatever it might be. So having flexibility in the code base would be a gating question for me as far as the organizations I'm talking to. Also sounds like an opportunity, by the way, for somebody to figure out how to standardize this as a SaaS module.
Yeah, because that's a question with, the old school, it was the advisors, consultants, either flat fee or hourly. And you obviously got a lot more flexibility and potentially a higher quality output by doing hourly, because the person working for you got, if they needed to lean into something and they got your buy-in and approval, then they got to spend the extra time to increase the quality of the product. I think people are addressing the paradigm shift that if it's free, then you're the product. Now, SaaS has become pretty well established as, people are willing to spend, 10, 20, 30 bucks for a monthly subscription. Do you think there's a subscription plus for, the tokenization, incremental cost aspect? Do you think the big conundrum that's going to have to be solved by the entrepreneur is how to price it?
Certainly. And in light of likely increased competitive pressures for people because, I jest a little, but my dev partner and I can sit down and look at what somebody's doing in one of these model-based companies and theoretically deconstruct it in a matter of minutes.
Yep.
And yes, there's a lift in replicating it, and there's a lot of nuance and whatnot, but it's not the lift that it would have been previously. So finding a competitive pricing model that is durable and meets the changes in these variable costs will be important. Personally, I like sort of what you were describing, which is sort of BYO model, where there's a set subscription fee, and then you're encouraging users, if they want to have increased scale savings, to use their own API connection to the model. So if they turn into a power user, it's sort of on them. Now you're losing, this is a totally different conversation, but you're losing your arbitrage advantage in the pricing of the tokens. So if I was advising a company, I wouldn't do that. But as a user of these technologies, I definitely appreciate the ability to do that, to bring my own costing structure to the table.
My sense is the difference between proprietary and open source on any given month, you got to take a wide enough time frame, but it's kind of tomato. Do you have a sense of, as you know, we're focused on early stage founders here, making that decision on running the open source, and so your cost structure of supporting the customers is a little bit different. Have you thought about the give and take between, let's say, an OpenAI and Claude versus Meta?
It depends on the use case and just ease of application. So an open source model, Meta's Llama is the primary open source model that's doing the rounds. It is an excellent model. It scores extremely well, and you have the ability to manipulate it for your needs. You do have a lift, and you do have a variable cost, but the variable cost is in terms of process. So you're hosting it on Azure, you're hosting it on AWS or whatever, so there's a bill that's coming down. Versus tokens, which are the sort of per unit increment of the closed source models, the frontier models like Anthropic or GPT. And I would say that the economics continue to tighten, particularly as you see models like OpenAI's 4.0 mini launch, which is really fast and really pretty good and really cheap. So you look at, it's math, right? Well, okay, tier one is just math. Like, right. What is the process going to look like versus what is the tokenization? 2 would be complexity, which is what a lift it is going to take in order to establish hosting a model either locally or in the cloud, and what it means is when the models change and they need to update. Like there's a lift there somewhere. And then there is the applied piece of it, of what you're actually doing. And if you need to do something that is highly proprietary, highly sensitive, or highly customized, then you really have no choice. You need to use an open source model to do that. You're not going to build your own model. It's laughable to talk about that. But tweaking a model through fine-tuning an open source model and keeping it locked down in such a way that you're not feeding data to the big open source models, or even the supposition of data going out there, because that's a conversation in unto itself, that by terms of service, if you're doing it right, they're not allowed to use your data, yet pretty much everyone in the community has doubts that that is the case, just from some sort of for some technical reasons. There is a non-zero chance that there is bleed into the model, and if you're dealing with the formula for Coke, you really shouldn't be putting it out there, much less HIPAA data or PCI data or anything like that. So you're dealing with highly sensitive data that needs to be shielded, or you're doing something that is very customized, and you're a mere mortal as far as your funding. Like, that's where you're going to have to operate.
Right. One of the things that you had mentioned is that you had an epiphany, and then you accidentally found yourself with a multi-session training course. Can you tell me about that intellectual journey of how you had the idea and then how it happened, and how, I guess, maybe some tools facilitated that coming together, which seems like that is increasingly easy for folks to do because of the support. It's really just a matter of the idea, and then the tools really facilitate that.
Sure. So backing up just for a moment, when I rolled in with this, with my MadBrainsAI as my consultancy in this particular space, I was hot to trot with trying to solve the world's problems. I'm going to roll out and I'm going to apply OpenAI in your organization, and we're going to reinvent the entity. And I'd sit down with a CEO, and they'd say, GPT what? And it's really not that much different now. There's a surprisingly low level of literacy, even in tech-enabled organizations, about a lot of this. They're certainly talking about it, but literacy is different.
Yeah, so literacy is aware of the thing, maybe typed in a few prompts, got an interesting output, and then how would you consider kind of those layers of literacy, kind of from someone that's aware of it, but what level of knowledge is required to do something useful with it?
So it's what I was saying earlier. You need to have waded in and really reached the edges of it. You need to spend. Ethan Mollick is a big influencer in the AI community, and he has just lovely thinking around the space. And he espouses the idea of 10 directed hours of experimentation with a specific task. You're confronted with a task. So there's going to be a post this recording. There's a processing task. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into it, and saying, I'm going to solve this particular task using AI, and I'm going to get frustrated, I'm going to get angry, but I'm going to really try and do that. And doing that a few times gives you enough exposure that you know enough to be dangerous. But there's people don't understand the edges of that, where what it can do and what it can't do, because so many marketers have sold this as just this point and shoot automagic thing, and it's not. This is an amplifier right now that can remove a lot of friction from a lot of tasks, but it's not really going to do the task for you. You still have an obligation to be part of that cycle to solve problems. So within organizations, I was constantly basically doing AI 101. I'd sit down and say, and they'd contract with me. I'd sit down with their C-suite or their board or whatever it was, and they weren't ready for the wider conversation of how do we actually do something with this. So I started doing a lot of speaking of AI 101. What's a neural network? What's an LLM, etc. And I found that I just didn't feel like I was well levered, and that a good way to approach it would be to start to put training programs together that were more asynchronous. So now when an organization wants to hire me, I say, cool, great, I'd love to spend 90 minutes with you, but as a prereq, I need everybody who's going to be there to take this course, so that we don't spend all this time doing the basics, and instead we can get into the meat of the conversation. And I found that really validating. I really have enjoyed the process, and it's a nice part of my business in general. But to get to the actual epiphany, which I spit out a course yesterday in about 3 hours or so, which is pretty remarkable, actually, about how long it usually takes to do this. And the reason why is I'm always looking for very practical, boots on the ground, everybody should be able to understand this type applications of this. Not training a custom model, not taking over your customer service roles or whatever. It's just the way that we operate. And I was going back and forth with a client, a general scoping type thing, where there's a proposal, right, in a sales process. Then you have a phone call. And that phone call leads to a refined proposal. And when you send the refined proposal, there's always an email that takes place. And then there's a budgeting process. And then there's a final scoping process. And then there's a contracting process, etc. And I'm so AI enabled that all of this stuff just bleeds into the way I do things. Go ahead.
You're using AI to do that process? Or you have trained... Or I guess I would say, in my mind, you've probably designed enough prompts that you add a few specifics and then you submit the custom prompt?
The irony is that you don't really need to do a lot of proactive prompt engineering to make this stuff happen. So I may be using...
Is that because there's so much institutional knowledge in the LLMs?
Yes, there's so much knowledge in there. You do need to do basic framing. So just to be clear, like the example I love to give is, if you're standing in Times Square and you yell to the crowds, what should I read or what should I do? You're going to have all kinds of answers, particularly in Times Square. But if you show up at a bookstore and you walk to the back of the bookstore and you're looking at historical fiction, and then you turn to the green-coated person and you say, what should I do? Well, you've set context. You've walked into a bookstore. You're looking for a book. You've walked back to historical fiction. You're probably looking for a historical fiction book. So you've brought the neural nodes closer together so you're going to get a better result. So just if there's a basic takeaway here for people who are getting used to this is walk into your bookstore and set that context. Right. So you're telling the LLM, whichever is your flavor, because they are all sort of interchangeable. I have a relatively strong preference for Claude right now, just because I think it is a little bit ahead just at the moment, but that'll change. So you set that context. Hey, Claude, you are an expert in proposal writing and business negotiations. Cool. This is me and what I am after. I need to do a training program for X, Y, and Z client, and now help me out. So I may be starting with a set document, but the process, there were a lot of steps that I laid through there, but I would have used the LLM to develop the original proposal to some degree. And this isn't seconds. This is hours of back and forth and understanding how to do it, but I get a good work product and send it out. Then I have a phone call, and I record my phone call and take a transcription. And I'm adamant about this. I always, with permission, of course. If somebody doesn't want to be recorded, I'm not going to record them. But if I have permission, you then have that very ordinary back and forth about scope. And now you have a transcript. So you take the transcript and you take it into the conversation and say, hey, this was the transcript follow-up. Analyze the proposal per this transcript and identify the opportunities for change in the scope. And then you have a working partner for, these are the 15 things the client suggested they needed to be changed. These are the things that you immediately agreed with. These were the things that were ambiguous. So you can say something like, okay, let's just integrate 1 through 5. Number 3, strike, I don't want to do that. And number 15, let's amend it in this way. And literally, that's the shorthand. You say number 15. You don't have to rephrase it or anything out. It knows which one is number 15. And then it will output the new proposal layered on the information you had before. And now you're looking at a revised proposal, which of course you're going to read through. You can't abdicate. And now your next step is to write that email. And now you take that exchange and say, write an email to the client indicating what changes we made, indicate that on change 3 we didn't want to do this for this reason, and now you have that cover email. And in a matter of a few seconds, you've gone from the conversation, the transcript, the amended decision to an output to the client, and out it goes, out the door.
You had mentioned to me that one of the other, I think, non-obvious uses was kind of real-time 360s. I thought that was really interesting because not only you're leveraging the tools like you just explained, but then once you have some level of corpus of interaction with a client, you get to kind of check in with yourself and see. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Sure. I also, among many things, I operate as a CEO founder coach. So I have a number of CEOs that I work with, and I use transcripts of calls for a whole bunch of different things. Certain clients have sort of regimented curricula that I'm developing because I want to get them to a certain point of capacity. And as a coach, it can be tough to know how well I'm doing. Am I just bloviating, or am I actually pushing them towards something? So an action that I like to do when I'm feeling robust in my ego is to take the curricula that I've developed and then inject the transcripts of the conversations I've had and basically grade myself. Did I adhere to the curriculum? The answer is usually no, because people want to talk about what they want to talk about, and that's totally fine. But I want pushback such that I can learn about my exchanges. There's also, most of the transcription tools offer distribution of speech features and sentiment analysis. So how often is the conversation positive, neutral, or negative? Who's talking more? My personal goal is to speak less than 40% of the time. That I want the client to use that opportunity to really get things out on the table, and it's their time, right? Not, again, me pontificating about whatever. So I can gauge my performance in that way. It also has a very practical use, because after years of working with some of these folks, there's a lot of density there. And being able, having a wild idea about a client's business in the middle of the night, being able to sort of check in with my own client-based chatbot about that idea, one, sort of factually, remind me of when this client last engaged with PR and what they were doing. Oh, okay, they've done all of these things in PR, this idea is not that interesting. Or with a challenging engagement, how is the client going to react if I say this? And we're not really there as far as personification of these tools, but from a learning exchange activity, like an ideation opportunity, as in a role where it is contractually one-on-one. I don't have a team that's like analyzing this. It's just me, which is appropriate. I want to make sure that I have an ideation partner who is going to be unbiased and push me in ways that need to be pushed.
Have you noticed a bright line on how deep that corpus of content has to be? Is it minutes? Is it hours?
Well, it'll work right off the bat. So, a single transcript,
Okay.
It will. So, just a technical bit that people need to understand is this idea of context, and this comes up, and that's how much information can be put in front of a model for it to absorb that information, make sense of it, and put something out. And in the early days, way back in 23, you'd have pretty small context windows, and you'd run out of room, basically, and the model would just stop working because it's full. Its brain is full, essentially. So you had to start developing technical solutions to this, which are usually approached to something called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, and there's a lot of complexity there that allows the model to deal with more related information with less context and to be more efficient about the way it yields results. Well, context windows continue to expand. And they expand all the time, and sometimes unannounced. And that means you can put more and more information in front of one of the models in terms of a chat and have it stay with the program before it starts kind of going off the rails in some way, shape, or form. The more information, the better. But you cannot abdicate. Like you must be present in the conversation, just like it would be with a junior employee or an intern or something like that. You're not going to say, "Hey, intern, write a proposal and send it." No, you're going to say, "Hey, intern, do some research on the proposal. Meet with me. I'm going to help you out to incorporate that into the actual proposal, and then I'm going to review it, and I'm going to add my own flavor to it." We're doing the same thing. We're just taking that extra step and extra time out of the loop.
With an eye towards, again, startup founders, let's say startups that are probably pre-revenue, less than 10 folks, what is a must-use or concept? Well, let me step back. So for some context, one of my clients has been very successful, started a bunch of successful companies. He said to me, he's like, you don't have to worry so much about AI replacing you. You need to worry about you being replaced by somebody that's able to use AI for the leverage that it gives them versus someone that just, doesn't know how to use AI. Because one of the things that I learned it really helped me sharpen my thinking on a concept. Like if I'm going to write a Substack about something about accounting and trying to describe why a chart of account is important for an early stage startup and the things that are useful about that, it helped me sharpen my thinking because I had a conversational partner that had a lot of context. Is there a must-have way for effective founders and entrepreneurs to engage with AI just from a simple leverage standpoint? Like you can't not do this. Anything come to mind? Is it? I don't know. Is there a conversational partner that's talking about, kind of, I guess maybe a maybe not as professional consigliere as you provide with a coaching service, but someone to talk through their ideas that maybe that person, the LLM, has enough technical context to respond? Is there some base case where you're like, everybody should be at least doing this?
Well, sure. It's what I said a minute ago. It's using the tools. It is. You do not have to invest in some giant going to solve all your problems type technology, because it's not. At this stage, it's not. But having an AI forward culture in your organization such that you are adding AI to the room, or you're inviting AI to the room basically for everything. So your meetings, your exchanges, your ideation, your rigor. I think the 10-person startup is a good example, because solopreneurs are solopreneurs and they're going to do whatever they need to do to survive, right? But at 10 people, you're starting to have some subordinate relationships and things like that. Not everybody's a chieftain. And trying to free up as much time for your critical people as you can through automation and review is really important. I like to frame this around the idea of working geniuses. There's a book, The 6 Types of Working Geniuses, and everybody they're basically 6 types. 2 you're probably really good at, 2 you're okay with, and 2 you hate, that are just like draining for you in whatever reason. And often in a small business environment, people find themselves in that draining place. And we do this to people unconsciously, where you hire somebody for a specific skill set. They are just a fantastic salesperson. And we, instead of them being out in the field, working the phones, they are doing sales reports and all this other stuff that takes them away from their working genius. And if you can identify ways of putting people into their working genius, it can be a huge amplifier. So I jest in some of my presentations. I have something I call the pyramid of suck, which is simply a 3-tiered pyramid of AI projects. And at the very top are like business-changing things. Like, this is going to change our industry and everything about our business. But at the bottom are just simply things we don't like to do, that are just little pain points. Like, I don't like to write that email after the proposal, but you have to do it. It's what people are actually going to pay attention to. And I would have labored over those, and it would have taken me a long time, and it's just sort of draining for me. And now if I can get to 90% with just some tweaks at the end, I get to move on to the things that I really like and get to explore. Related is taking the burden. Some of what draws people away from their working genius as a manager is that they're hired as a specialist and now they're managing other people and they're maybe not very good at it, but enabling their people to use AI or LLMs specifically as a bit of a gut check. Like, before you waltz into the CEO's office with a problem, we used to laugh, did you Google it? Right? I can't tell you how many times I've passive-aggressively said that. Shakes my head in shame, right? But now it's, did you run that through Claude, or did you run that through OpenAI? Like, proof test it a little bit? No. Well, you could have come to my office 2 steps farther down the process, right, if you had leaned into this technology. So it actually starts with a culture of experimentation, which is generally not a hard thing within startups, right? But also having a policy and enablement.
What does a safe space look like in a startup where these conversations, they're proprietary, yes, maybe. They're sensitive, yes, maybe. But I still want to get my feedback. What options? I mean, how do you define what's available?
Well, you have to decide whether or not you believe the terms of service of the platforms. One, you said this earlier, but if the product is free, the product, 100%. Don't do that. Friends don't let friends use free AI. That's not a good idea.
And is your opinion that being a premium member is giving you more control, or is that not necessarily?
That is what the terms of service say.
Okay.
It's actually funny. I just posted yesterday a little GPT that I built that's a terms an analyzer for looking at how a AI partner is going to manage your data. So you simply drop in, either cut and paste a list of the terms of service, or you just link to it,
right,
and they'll do a risk analysis. And it's like, oh wow, they have the ability to do whatever they want with your data, because it's not just the big platforms; it's the little guy.
Right.
I don't know if you've been watching the Olympics, but there's this constant ad from Salesforce about the data thieves stealing your sales information, and it's not totally untrue. But you have to decide if you are going to believe the OpenAI. So I use the Teams plan, which is $25 a user a month, and they say they're not going to use it for training. It's a bit of a trust but verify. I am not dealing in rocket science or the formula for Coke, but if I have personally identifiable information, again, HIPAA, for goodness sake, or PCI.
So if you're just prepping for a conversation with your boss,
I'm not going to worry about it.
Feels pretty safe. If you're working with, I don't know, even proprietary code, doesn't seem like that's a heavy lift in this world. What if you are paranoid? What is the path of least resistance to get to the open source? Is it a Hugging Face implementation? I mean, how do you look at the path for someone that just doesn't want to spend 5 or 10 hours configuring their thing?
It's pretty point and click at the moment through Hugging Face, as you mentioned. There's an Azure dashboard. If you look at your organization, most small organizations do not have cloud services developed. But if you're talking about founders who are doing some sort of SaaS product or whatever it is, they might.
Right.
So they might already have an EC2 instance stood up. So Amazon is making it pretty easy to click, spin these things up. And, you'll have the instance. And I don't have a ton of experience with using those sort of installations as far as sort of this practical feedback. The Amazon model, Bedrock, is good, but it's not cutting edge. Meta's Llama is excellent and cutting edge, so I might tend that way as far as spinning up that model so that I can play with it that way. And you're hosting it, so it's funny, we all trust Microsoft and we trust Amazon, for goodness sake, with our data, because we have to, right? And there are all of these user restrictions and things like that are in place as far as access. And theoretically, that gives you the ability to partition these individual models as far as constraining information. I think that's a little fast and loose. It's not totally clear to me that you can take, spin up a meta model and just assume that your Azure access requirements aren't all tied in with it. And nightmare scenarios within organizations are random employee doing a search for what was the CEO's compensation last year, that sort of thing, and get an answer. You don't know if it's right or not, because that's the other thing that's going on. There's a practical level to this as far as data leakage, and what I tell people is, okay, you're looking at a cash flow statement, and a cash flow statement has pretty standard elements in it, or even a P&L. What if you just change the header from whatever your company name is to Acme Pie Company? So even if it does,
and then attribution is almost impossible.
It's going to be impossible. You're not going to ever connect the dots. And if you did, you couldn't trust it, because there are also plenty of people out there who think it's a good use of their time to be pumping fake information into these models so that they can confuse competitors. Tell me what is the sales prospect of my primary competitor in the Midwest next quarter? Okay, you get a document out. What, you're going to just trust it? I wouldn't. So I think there are legal issues, particularly if you're operating in Europe with GDPR, California with some of its identity restrictions, that could come back to bite you in ways that are going to be new and exciting for the lawyers over the next few years, right? But there's just a practical bit, and as an entrepreneur, I try to be as practical as I can. And I do run into organizations that are just like, it is verboten, we will not touch any of it, like, it's sort of to their detriment, I think. Like,
right.
Open up your marketing department to it then. Like, come on, what do you, marketers are all outward facing anyway. So if there's leakage, it's to your benefit.
Right.
And get your feet wet that way.
How do you create, what is the first step, and maybe this isn't quite the context of getting people that 101 AI, maybe we're at 102. What is the first step for a founder to have a useful chatbot, I guess? What do you consider, do you have to do anything? Really? It sounds like there doesn't need to be a huge level of context, but is there, do you reference the 10 best management books that you wanted to have a context for, the level of sophistication that you want the feedback?
So there are about 10,000 companies out there that spun up chatbots, and most of them were just garbage early on. They were just what you'd call a wrapper, which is it's a UX that's sitting on top of an API that's going into a model. The survivors, or those that actually add value, are more sophisticated about this. Two come to mind that are different formats. One is, and I'm not really endorsing anything in particular, but these are tools that I use in various ways. One is Dante, and the other is Vappy, the API. And Vappy is a super novel. It is a call bot such that it's a phone interaction bot, and it is a chat bot, but it is a verbal chat bot. So I built one yesterday that is tied to the scintillating topic of industrial safety in trucking based on OSHA standards. So I used an OSHA standard, plus I used some internal documents that the client had, and I established the knowledge base. Now, what's happening behind the scenes is that the platform is actually going through a creation of embeddings. So they're taking all of that information and they are doing that processing that makes it much more likely that you're going to get the right results between the pieces of the information. Importantly, there's also something called a temperature selector. And anybody who deals with technical prompting, like API type prompting, there's a field called temperature. And temperature is basically how crazy you're willing the model to be. So if it's really hot, like a 10, it's going to be like it's on mushrooms or something, like really loose connections between ideas, very, very creative, nuts. If it's a 1 or a 0, it's going to be just a fax man and trying really hard to stick within its constraints. So your challenge as a builder is to determine what that balance is. If you're dealing with OSHA trucking safety, you don't want this thing making things up. So dialing down the temperature to the point where it can connect abstract concepts and not be just dumb, like, oh, so I literally was trying to chat with it about what happens. Is a vehicle unattended if it has a cat at the wheel? Like something just completely wild. And it might have broken had the temperature been too cold, like because it doesn't know how to deal with cats. So it has to have enough warmth in the model such that it can figure that out, that it's like, oh, well, duh, no, that doesn't count. But it was surprisingly robust that way. So I would say if you're looking at building your own chatbot, there's sort of a now answer and there's a tomorrow answer. The tomorrow answer is the platforms themselves are going to get better about this. And Google in particular has something they call Notebook LM, which is, to me at least, it's an obvious view of the future where you're able to apply a chatbot on top of folders. So you can take your
Okay.
Google Files folders and take, say, all the client folders, or organize your folders for accessibility, and just easily build a chatbot on top of it. So that's going to start happening. And in like Teams, you'll see that as well. In Copilot, will start being integrated more into Microsoft Office folders and whatnot. That's really obvious, and it's sort of dangerous for companies that are playing in this space. Like, it feels like a space that is cool now and is not going to be cool in a little bit, because the big boys will step in and they'll just featureize whatever you're doing. People will push back on that. Fine, that's fine. But the right now is, you can use these accessible chatbots that are out there. The piece that you need, though, is you need to make sure they're actually using embeddings, because otherwise you'll just be restricted by the context length that they're able to put in there, and that promotes a higher likelihood of what we call hallucinations, is when the models make stuff up, right? So you want to double check with your vendor that they're doing that, and then having model portability, as we were talking about earlier. So VAPI in particular, I'm very impressed with it. Super, at some point I'll have you listen to one of these, but it has that model portability function that I can just select whichever model family I want and the individual model, and it immediately displays my variable cost implications. So I've seen as high as 19 cents a minute and as low as 5 cents a minute, depending on the mix of models and voices and other things like that. And as a consumer, even as a business consumer, boy, do I appreciate being able to understand that. So run the cheapest model I can, maybe not in the case of the OSHA bot. So I'm willing to spend, 4 cents more a minute to have a higher quality model. But if I'm just doing, information about when the burger shop is open, it's probably
cut some corners.
Yeah, you can probably cut some corners.
I think it's really interesting because it sounds like you have, with MadBrains, at least a couple ways to engage with somebody. You can probably do a little bit of a consulting on an actual project, and then there's more of a high-level consigliere coaching. You want to tell us a little bit more about your practice and the ways to work with you?
I think my favorite engagements are where I'm engaged to either form an AI council or be on an AI council. So organizations who have decided this is something they want to do, you need to have a group of people, ideally spread from various aspects of the organization, who are coming together on a frequent basis to identify what policies, practices, tools, road mapping needs to be done in the organization, which is easy to say if you're me. But if you are, busy executive guy trying to figure this stuff out, it's really hard to do blind. So having somebody like me who's your go-to, who is on the council and can kind of yay nay things and bring forward those aspects of literacy, I'm finding that to be really powerful. We do implementations all the way down the chain. So we can, if somebody wants to, we can do custom model installations type things. Training is also just another place. So the asynchronous training is really easy. You want people to get exposed to these ideas. You like the way I approach it, then here we go. There are trainings. We also do bespoke trainings, which is sort of a different deal. It's definitely a different tier.
And is that context sensitive? Is that why it's bespoke?
Yes. So it's coming into an organization that is doing X, Y, or Z, and developing training specific to that organization and how that organization works.
How far down market do you, how small of an organization before you think this is kind of important, and it seems to me that this is borderline becoming like T's and C's. You gotta have them. At what stage, where are we in the maturation of, how small of a company is your responsibility as a founder or a chief executive is to have this in place?
Well, I'm not going to use numbers, but if you have employees, you absolutely need an AI policy. And because people need to understand some of these limits as far as information leakage. Like the policy will help you identify what tools people are allowed to use and what they're not, and create a vetting criteria such that people aren't just bringing stuff to the office. Because this idea of BYOAI is real. Like huge numbers of people, tens of millions of people are just...
it took us 3 to 5 years to bring your own device to kind of get figured out.
So this is not figured out, and people are sort of, they call it stealth tech, that people are sort of slyly doing their job through using these tools. Like, I'm getting away with one, right? Well, often they're using like off-the-shelf free tools with no vetting or anything to it. So that's a real risk. Like that's something you can't have. You need to have some sort of policy. Ideally, even if you're telling people to bring their own, working with an organization that's like, this is important to your future, but you need to pay for the tools. So, okay.
And we have no control.
But it's better than nothing, that at least they're using the paid version of the tools, so there could be some controls, whatever. So everybody needs some sort of a policy, and you can't forget that the policy also falls into your terms of service, because I'm not a lawyer, but you will see, and we are actually seeing, litigation and conflicts being created in work output. It should be pretty obvious if you're hiring MadBrainsAI to do something that I'm going to be AI forward. I'm going to be using AI all over the place, right? But you're starting to see pushback in contracts where larger organizations in particular are concerned about unfettered use of AI, and they're sliding into their contracts anti-AI clauses. So you can't have that if you are an AI-forward organization, right? If you're working with General Mills, well, I guess you want to continue to work with them. But if they say that, and I'm not saying, I have no idea if General Mills is doing this, but they say you can't use AI, you can't use any generative AI because they're concerned about downstream impact about images or copy or copyright or whatever it is. It's a valid concern that they're having. But you need to make sure that you're disclosing in your terms of service that you're using it and how you're using it and how you're protecting data. So, you have 5 people and you're very busy and you're doing a bunch of stuff. There are plenty of resources out there as far as doing a quick policy, as far as using some of these tools to adapt your terms of service, and then move on from there. But
do you have best practices templates or anything like that, the resources that you share just for people to kind of dip their toe in the water and wrap their heads around what it is, the question they're asking?
Yes, I haven't done a great job of like publicizing them, but that's something we do. Is we'll come in and in a simple engagement, we'll work within their risk structure to develop a policy, and then because I'm very hip on training, we'll try and tie that in with a policy specific training. That sort of. We're going to see how that flows out. There are plenty of policies and things like that are out there, though. One of the things I'm working on is a policy generator that sort of takes a vision of what your organization should be and allows you to tweak a policy based on that. So it's not just a boilerplate, that it's more customized to your organization. And of course, that would be an AI tool as well.
What is what are your what are the non-obvious uses of AI that you found most interesting that you've stumbled across in the last few months?
Non-obvious uses. I had a funny one. My wife is she's a federal attorney, and her world is about to get rocked by all of this, for sure. But being a government employee, she can't touch any of it. So there I am in the adjoining office, like Mr. AI, and she can't do anything with AI, but the people on the other side can. And she's already starting to see it as a prosecutor that
the ability to just go through thousands of documents.
Yes, exactly. So it's this brute force thing that's heading her way. That she has to respond to all the arguments, and spurious arguments don't make judges happy. But the arguments are getting better and better and better. And some of them are just completely made up. But if they're using actual legal tools to do this, that's less so. But by and large, she's not AI enabled at all. But I took one of my kids to Disneyland a couple of weeks ago, and in July on a Saturday to Disneyland. So any parents out there should be shuddering. She completely noped out. She said, "Nope, not going to do it. Not interested. That's on you." So I used Claude to plan a Disneyland day and develop strategies for staying out of lines. And dang it, if I didn't wait in a line all day. 75,000 people there, and we were like rock stars because we knew what time of day would be what ride length type things, and it wasn't dynamic or anything, and it was just sort of a general strategic outlay from it.
And it worked?
Yeah, it worked. We didn't wait in line all day. I couldn't believe it.
That's incredible.
It was absolutely amazing. That will never happen again. Whatever.
Been jinxed.
Yeah, exactly. I've been jinxed. I think that was that's not obvious. I mean, you tell people experiment with the stuff using something that's interesting to you. It's not just doing an RFP or something like that. I have this legit problem with Disneyland. Help me work through that particular problem. Jaw-dropping stuff. The new audio releases from OpenAI, which will happen sometime in the next 5 minutes to 5 weeks. They're already out there in the wild in some respect. Are brain melting. That they did some of these demos back in their demo day several months ago, and then they got some hate, and the rollouts were really slow. But there's something called latency in voice communication, and this idea that if you and I are talking, I'm speaking into this microphone, or I'm speaking to Siri or whatever device, it basically has to go through several different models where it's transcribed, and then it's interpreted, and then it's turned back into a vocal output. And that means a latency of as much as a couple seconds. So if you were to use the voice command on the GPT app now, there would be a couple seconds between responses. It does hurt my brain a little bit to think about, but the multimodal aspects of LLMs are something that I don't think that people appreciate or understand. That we have this idea that the world is built on data and text, and the world is built on all kinds of things in terms of sounds and images and whatnot. And these new models are actually capable of ingesting audio, processing audio as audio, and then putting out audio as audio. So they're not going through that intermediate step. They're actually making neural connections between functions of the audio. Same is true for video, same is true for image. And that means that the latency is about to get crazy, 2 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, I think is the latest. And again, I'm a fanboy of Ethan Mollick. He just had a post last week on his One Useful Thing blog where he was sampling some of these because him being him, he has access to some of these beta tools. And there's one where he's talking to GPT and asking it to do various vocal inflections: sad, happy, surprised, laugh while you're talking, sound like Dracula, whatever. And two things. One, the latency was incredible. Just as if you and I are talking, there's almost no pause in between. And those emotions that were being conveyed in there are real. This is going to have major societal impacts when your device has opinions and feelings, or at least it feels like it has opinions and feelings. And that's...
Give empathy to your customer service bot.
Well, I have to admit, I was listening to not Ethan's, but some other recordings of people's interactions with this, and some people think it's you're just going to be faster if you're just mean to it. And it actually, to me, it triggers something human in me, where I'm oh, wow, wait, you're being mean to this thing. I'm very aware this is a device, and their AGI is a long way off, but you're treating something that sounds sort of human in this nasty way. I'm very polite. I mean, they might remember, too. So I'm the guy, when they come for us, remember, I was the one who was very polite to these things.
I find myself saying please and thank you.
Yeah, please, thank you. There's no real evidence that it does anything, but I think that just to be a civil human, it just makes your day better to be sort of, friendly with it.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting that some of the earlier, attempts to hack the AIs, that they were threatening kittens, and that seemed to work.
Oh yeah, yeah. You get all kinds of crazy stuff that's built into the model, and there's like emergent behaviors. That's like a whole different topic. But related to the voice, just picture I'm sitting here, I'm holding a pen and paper. How analog is that, right? But when latency goes away as an issue, and you have these really large context windows, it is going to enable an entirely new UX, and that UX is speech. And at the level that I'm operating in a lot of respects, I do a lot of delegation and pointing and things like that. That reality of a Jarvis from the movie Iron Man, where you're like kind of sitting back in a chair and like, we're going to do this proposal over here, and then we're going to take this email over here and make sense of it. The technology is catching up with the promise of an audio-based UX. And I think that's going to be super interesting to see and really annoying in open space workplaces as everybody is talking to their computers all day. But we'll see how that plays out. But I think that's something that is coming our way swiftly and quietly.
Agreed. This has been incredibly helpful and hopefully insightful for folks. Do you have any additional comments or guidance, again, focusing on early stage founders of, even if you're not building AI tools, you just can't get by without doing this when you're integrating AI into your workflows?
So one is you've got to gut check your ego a little bit. I've run into a lot of businesses that were founded 2, 3, 4 years ago before all of this. And now there's a better way. And it changes their underlying economics. It changes the way their dev is done. And it is a rough spot to be, having to put in $1 million, $500,000 into dev. And you're looking at it and you're like, if I were going to do this today, this would be a much better way of doing it. And you have to decide at what point of your journey you're going to make that change. I'm not saying you should scrap everything you're doing, but you need to be making sure that you're looking at how these models are developing such that whatever you just built isn't going to get obliterated. And clinging to that is a mistake. And I think that's one, and the other is what I said before, is just being open-minded about the way this stuff works. It is frustrating. It really is. It's not a 100% solution. But if you can amplify just a few things in your life, like you can clear up a lot of time to get more done, keep yourself focused, and move faster. Okay, so that's important too in a startup, right? You need to move fast. You have limited resources, and we all have a lizard brain inside of us that has us, flagellating over issues for weeks and weeks and weeks. But if you can move faster because these tools are speeding up your ideation, you can compress timelines in totally new ways. So think about your processes and think about how you can inject basic type AI into them to speed them up. You do a product launch and everybody gets around for an ideation meeting and everybody's really excited. And then they kind of break. 2 weeks later, they come back with ideas for the product launch. No, you have the ideation meeting. 2 days later, you have the follow-up meeting where everybody has all of these fleshed out ideas because they've been partnering with AI. Partnering, not abdicating, right? You should be putting the smack down on people who are clearly just phoning in whatever it is. But you can compress that timeline such that you don't get sort of stuck in analog, not analog, but traditional ways of doing things.
Great. And then last question, are there any low-hanging fruit, must-have resources that you recommend? We've got one useful thing, the great Substack. Anything that comes to mind that you're like, if you're interested, these are some things you should be paying attention to.
So, as I said earlier, I read a lot. If you like digests, the combination of AI Breakfast and Runway, which I believe are related to each other, or dailies. AI Breakfast may be every few days. It's a nice digest of information, and there are 500 people out there that are doing these. These are just ones that are well done, and they got ahead of the herd, so they have better resources, I think, to mine for information. A must listen to for me is it's called the Marketing AI Institute. I was literally listening to the latest episode before I came in here. Very even keel guys who break this stuff down. on all kinds of front. Ethan Mollick's book, which is called Co-Intelligence, is great. He's also great to follow on LinkedIn. I wouldn't suggest you do all of these things, but sort of find the things that suit your needs. If I did nothing else, I would probably listen to the Marketing Intelligence podcast, just because they're so practical and they're well grounded about this stuff. It's a good listen.
Awesome. And last but not least, how do folks find you?
LinkedIn's a good place. I mean, you should also follow me. I post weekly short attention span snippets, usually a video about one sort of practical pieces for people. I do like to focus on practical AI. I'm relatively easy to find there, but MadBrainsAI is our primary site. And I obviously love talking about this, so I'm always open to conversations.
This has been incredibly insightful. I appreciate your time.
Great.
Thank you.